Back. Okay, then I'm okay. I can take it.
Okay.
Yeah. I can handle it. Yes. Emotionally.
I have to do that fast. I need to think properly first. Yeah. Okay, but I actually wanted to see if you all can remember anything from the renal system. Do you think you all can still do what you did last week?
Yes.
You all played the cover last week, right? You all did really badly in the start. Then you all improved at the end. But then today, do you think you will go back to square one? Yeah. Actually, I was thinking, right, every week, right, if we just keep replaying the same thing, right, whether you retain more knowledge.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if you all can retain the same knowledge. So, you'll go very fast, huh? You'll go very fast. Yes. Oh, it's really that hot. Actually, this week, if you look at the list, usually for respiratory system, most of you all did relatively okay for the quiz. Yeah, I haven't marked the energetics one, but then after energetics, then we'll see, who needs to come, who's recommended to come for next one. Okay, is everyone in? Now go and begin, huh? Okay, ready? Okay, let's see how much you remember from last week. Cannot be that bad. Okay, look, you are retaining stuff. Okay? It's not all gone. Okay, still doing quite okay. Hey, who's Nicholas? Okay, you are retaining startup. You must have the mindset. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's the wrong one, lah. I'm not even
Remember the proximal convoluted tubule needs to absorb stuff. Shall I put this up somewhere? Then you can replay it. Remember, it's a lot of mitochondria, right? For what? What's the mitochondria for? Okay, that's what all the mitochondria is for. Yeah, for active transport. The descending loop of the what can you reabsorb? What can't you reabsorb? When something is permeable to water, what does it imply about the membrane? Okay, good job. Okay, water can only be reabsorbed via this process. Yeah? Yes, passive diffusion. Okay, actually I find there are some students that still put active transport. So that's one common misconception. Oh, sorry. My fingers. I think press down after it. My finger. Who's man? What membrane protein will help in osmosis? If you are dehydrated, which one should not happen? You want more water to be reabsorbed. Yeah, it's mirror, it's mirror.
I didn't even drop it. Nobody's moving up or down.
Okay, if you are dehydrated, you should reabsorb more water, not less.
Oh, I didn't, yeah, I thought that.
The last question. Who is done? compare with the last round's end, but are you still better than the first round you played? Okay? If you are better than the first round you played, that is progress. Yeah? That means you are remembering things. Okay? Okay, we just need to hold it up. Okay, Mariam? Who's Nico?
Not me.
Oh, it's you. And then who is? Oh, your mind. Okay, so we must think positively. If you retain something, it's a good sign because it makes it easier for you to revise when it comes to revision. Right? Can you imagine going to revision and everything looks totally unfamiliar? Right? As long as you keep something along the way each week, it will make revision easier. Okay? So we keep that positive mindset. Okay? Alright, for today's respiratory system, I am not very worried about this chapter for all of you because the toughest part is a part where if you can, remember we played with balloons in a bottle, or is that a foreign memory? Remember all this? Yeah, what do you, remember all this? Yeah? Okay, so today I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to highlight to you the important parts of this chapter. How you go about making notes for this chapter, I'm going to suggest a little bit. Okay? But for today, I don't have a Kahoot, but perhaps you'll play a respiratory one the next time round to see how much you retain. Right? And then as we go, once in a while, I'll pull back up the renal one and then see how much you retain here and there. Okay, we see how much we can keep along the way. Right? A constant revision will help. Okay, so for the respiratory system. Again, what is a good way to find out the scope of the topic? What do you look at? Very good. The learning objectives. If you feel overwhelmed, there's too much for you to study, go to the learning objectives. And the learning objectives will give you an idea of what's important. For this particular chapter, it's a bit special. I believe the learning objectives aren't concentrated on one page. Yeah? They have been spread out across each page. I think it's just for this chapter. I think we made a slight error, so we forgot to compile everything on the front page. Yeah, but you notice every chapter is all at the front. Okay, so this chapter you may need to help yourself to find out all the different parts. Okay, so for those that find this chapter a little bit overwhelming, I'm going to tell you what the parts of this chapter that you should focus on. Okay, let's begin. If you have your notes with you, this will be a good time to check if you have it in your notes. If you don't have your notes with you, what you could do is in your textbook, go and star or highlight because it's the important parts of the chapter. Okay, the very first part of this chapter starts off with the structure of the respiratory system. Is it important for you to know? I would say the important part is to understand how gases can reach your alveoli and how it can exit your lungs at the end of the day. That's as far as we can go. Okay? So, number one, for respiratory system, it's important for you to know the general structure of the system. Enough for you to explain how gases can go from outside to in and in to out. Okay? A very quick one will be that it begins in the nose, then it goes down to the trachea, and then to the bronchus, and then to the bronchioles, and then finally to where? Thank you. The alveoli. That's enough. Yeah? Okay, don't need to go super in depth. If you want to know what are the structural features, do you remember there's one particular RE that asks you to tick, or cross? Okay? Oh, that's a quiz. Right? Remember that particular one? Yeah. So that is a very good way of making a summary of the very relevant features of various parts. Yeah? So if you want to create a good set of notes, you could refer to that. That's a very summarized way of telling you what features are there. Whether it produces mucus, whether it has cilia, whether there's cartilage. That table is very useful for you. Okay? What kind of questions could come up? For this particular section, I could ask you the sequence. I could give you an MCQ where I scramble up the sequence and see if you can find the correct one. That's a way to test if you understand. I could provide like the time round and ask you which part has cilia, which part don't. Yeah? So I would say the kind of questions I can ask for this part is very low level one. It's just recall. Okay? this is not the meat of this chapter yet. Where do you think is the meat of this chapter? The what? Gaseous exchange. Okay, so there are two parts of this chapter. There's gaseous exchange, and then there's breathing. Right? Is there a difference? Okay, what's the difference between breathing and gaseous exchange? Okay, I'm hearing two things. Chemical reactions. And this one is? Okay, breathing has something to do with that. Okay, so if I were to split the two up, this chapter, the meat of this chapter, goes down to two things. Okay, so number two, what is the meat of this chapter 2 and 3? Number one, breathing mechanism. This one refers to the environment and you. Okay? The next thick part of this chapter is gaseous exchange. This happens at the cellular level. That means cell to cell. How do I pass the gases from cell to cell? Okay? So it's quite different. Which one is the tougher one for all of you? Gaseous exchange, is it? So actually, do you feel quite comfortable with the breathing mechanism part? The part where we play a lot in class, using the balloons and using yeah. That one is more visual. Personally, I also find that a little bit easier to understand. Right? Okay, but regardless, let's recap a little bit and I'll teach you some ways to remember that part better. Okay? So, this really is a meat. If you can understand these two parts of this chapter, actually you are quite solid already. Which I found you all did quite a solid job when you were making your own notes. Look at your own notes, I suspect that you spent a lot of your notes in this part at least. Breathing mechanism. Yeah? So perhaps it's gaseous exchange that we can work on. The number 4, this one is like the dessert of this chapter, is to understand the effects of smoking. Okay. Effects of smoking. What you first-hand experience? Not you, then who? Excuse me, you're implying that. Effects of smoking. What do we expect you to know for this part, effects of smoking? We do expect you to know the effects of the various chemicals. Effects of chemicals. And then also expect you to know emphysema. And how to spell emphysema? Looks wrong. Emphysema. Okay? Okay, sorry. For the structure, there is one part of the structure that we often ask quite a lot of times. Yeah, it's the structure of the alveoli. How is the alveoli adapted? Okay? Alveoli. Okay? How is it adapted for gaseous exchange? This is one question that we often want to see if you understand. Okay? So I think maybe in your notes you want to check that out also if you have that. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, what? COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. Yeah? That was quite general, so there are many things that could lead to it. Yeah, usually because this is one of the main things that we do. Okay? Okay, so structure of alveoli, that's something important that I hope that you get the hang of. Have we encountered such a question before? Right, how is the alveoli adapted for gaseous exchange? Eva? Do you need me to go through this part? How the alveoli is adapted for gaseous exchange? It was in the quiz, right? And actually, quite a number of you did quite okay for it. Okay? Some of the things will be one cell thick, there are many alveoli for large surface area, a lot of blood capillaries. Yeah? So you all did quite okay for this particular quiz. Okay? So let's focus on number 2 and number 3. These two are the meat of this chapter. Number 4, unfortunately, I do need you to remember. Okay? Yeah, I do need you to remember this yourself. Okay, but for this one, these two, there's a little bit of concept here that maybe it will help if we run through a little bit. Okay, so breathing mechanism. How do we breathe? Okay, let's erase all this first. Let's focus on number 2. How do we breathe? Okay, personally, I find that students are quite okay with this part. How do you all find for this part? 0 out of 5, your confidence level for mechanism of breathing. 0 out of 5. Okay. Okay, 3-ish. 3-ish. Yeah, okay. So, the mechanism of breathing, do you all want to have one with you? Do you all need one with you? Okay, sure. Okay, come, you all can hold one a bit. I don't know how many of them still working. Maybe. Oh! Oh my god. That was a disaster. That was so scary. Okay, I think I need you all to share a bit because not all of them are working, some are stopped. Wow, that was scary, man. Okay, so let me fix this one. Okay, you play with it for a while. Okay, you all want to share a bit. Oh my god. Okay, now I pass on behind. Okay, so breathing. Okay, we only have 3 forms of breathing. Okay, sorry, not 3 forms of breathing. 3 types that you have to think of. Okay, how quickly we run through this part? I feel like this part you are quite okay with it. Okay, so we try out. So, how many kinds of inhalation do you have?
3.
2.
2.
Inhale. Okay, so feeling now. Okay, let's go. Normal inhalation, breathe in. Now just normally breathe out without effort. Now forcefully breathe out a bit more. Okay, remember that? Which one requires effort? Okay, the third one requires effort, right? Right now. What about breathing in? Okay, so actually one of them doesn't require effort. Right? You breathe in. The next part actually don't require effort. Just relax. If you want to breathe out a bit more, will require effort. Okay? So actually, out of the 3 processes, 2 requires effort, 1 not so much. Okay, so the 3 you should take note of is what? Okay, normal, quiet, inhalation. Then there is passive exhalation. And then the last one is forced exhalation. Correct. Okay, so what are the muscles involved for this part? Okay, so we have 2 sets of muscles we can talk about, right? There's either external intercostal muscles or internal intercostal muscles, right? Okay, so if you want to breathe in, one way I remember it, if you don't want to think so much, right, it's rise. Oh really? Okay, you breathe in rise. Breathe in rise. Okay, but how do I use this? I use it this way. You relax your internal intercostal muscles. And then you contract your external intercostal muscles. So this is how I remember if I don't want to go through all the thinking process. Yeah? Rise. You breathe in rise. Right? A cheap way of remembering. Anything else contracts, actually we still have something that contracts, your diaphragm. So another thing that contracts will be the diaphragm. So how is, so now this is rise. Okay, another thing that will contract is your diaphragm. Which makes sense. Breathing in requires effort. When you breathe in, all the muscles involved, a lot of the muscles involved are contracting, from the diaphragm to the external intercostal muscles. I think therefore the challenge for students is, how do I know whether it's the internal one that's contracting or the external one that's contracting? Okay? I think for this particular one, rise would help. Okay, rise would help. But if you really want to understand how it happens, we could look at this particular setup over here. Here, oops, where is your sternum? Okay, this is your sternum, this is your spine. Where is your sternum? Do you feel this middle bone over here? That's the sternum. Where's your spine? The spine is behind. So you need to look at this from the side view. This is my side view. Okay? The spine is behind, the sternum is here. So my ribs are actually going around like that. Yeah? One rib, two ribs, three ribs. Yeah? So this is just two of the ribs from the side view. If you really want to understand how the external intercostal muscles contracting can help, we need to look at it this way. If we have this model over here, notice, if I want air to rush into the balloon, what do I need to do? I need to put it down, right? I need to pull it down, then air rushes in. What's the whole point of pulling it down? Okay, we need to increase the volume. Okay, so the whole point for normal quiet inhalation is that we want to increase the volume of the thoracic cavity. When we increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, what happens inside? We end up decreasing the pressure inside. And air will rush in. That's the logic of it. So this is one way we can increase the volume inside by contracting the diaphragm. Another way to increase the volume is through this way. Now I'm going to contract the external intercostal muscles. Okay, the external intercostal muscles is called external because they connect on the outside of the ribs. Okay, the diagonal way, external. The internal one is over here, it's inside. Okay, so the muscles you are feeling in between your ribs there, you are kind of touching the external ones. Yeah. Watch what happens when I contract the external intercostal muscles, and it kind of goes with how I'm breathing. I'm going to breathe in. Breathe in. Okay, breathe in, I contract, and my sternum goes up and out. And when it goes up and out, I'm also increasing the overall volume in the thoracic cavity area. Okay, breathe in, contract. Breathe out, I just relax this up. Then it swings back down. Okay, so if you really want to understand, this is how it works. Do you really need to write it down? Not really. Just say external intercostal muscles contract. I do not require you to explain in detail. But sometimes I find this one, when students see it, then you will understand it better and appreciate it a bit better. Okay? But if you cannot appreciate it, your rise will help. Okay? So let's go to passive exhalation. Therefore, for passive exhalation, all you're doing is you just relax everything. Right? Just relax everything. So there's a misconception. Some students think that when it comes to passive exhalation, that you relax, that you start to contract the internal intercostal muscles. Okay? Passive inhalation and exhalation, actually you relax the internal intercostal muscles. You also relax the external intercostal muscles. I don't know what this is. Okay? I did not think of anything for this. So it's not quite useful over here. Right? But actually you are relaxing every single thing, even the diaphragm. Yeah? Okay, so then it comes to forced exhalation. Forced exhalation, I will use Eric. Okay, external intercostal muscles, relax. The internal intercostal muscle, contract. Okay, so I will use Eric for forced exhalation. If you want to appreciate why you need to contract the internal intercostal muscles for you to forcefully breathe out, then I'll show it to you right now. If you want to appreciate it. If you cannot appreciate it, Eric helps. Okay? So it's either Rice or Eric. Both require effort. The middle one, no effort. Okay, so this is Eric. Okay, this is you now. Imagine you want to forcefully exhale. Right? If I want to forcefully exhale, notice that your sternum goes in and downwards. Right? In and downwards. So how do we do that? It's as good as me doing this. I crush the bottle. Yeah, that's you trying to decrease the amount of volume. So where's the intercostal muscles? It's on the inside. Let me contract this. If I were to contract this, this is what's happened. This is what happens. Yeah. If I were to relax that, then it will swing back up. Okay. So again, I contract. Force exhalation. Relax. If I want to breathe in, I contract the external intercostal muscles. Relax. Passive exhalation. Forceful inhalation. Forceful exhalation. Yeah. So I find this part of the chapter still not too bad if you can visualize all this. Yes.
The other day you told us for the force activation, the abdominals also contract, right?
Okay. So force exhalation, there are some other details you could add in. For example, for force exhalation, you can contract one more thing. You contract your abs. Okay? You could contract your abs. Wow, Erica. Hey. Not too bad, Erica. You can contract your abs. How does contracting your abs help in anything? Okay, so imagine this is the rib cage area. This is your diaphragm. Right? And then your abs are here. So if you contract your abs, how does it help to reduce the amount of thoracic volume? Yeah, you feel it yourself up. You go and contract now. What you're doing is you're squeezing all your organs inwards. Your organs have no space to go. It cannot pop out from the back, right? So like when you contract your abs, then you start to see your stomach start to pop out from here. Then you start to prod it. Cannot. There are muscles here also. So when you contract, what you're doing is the organs have only one way to go, which is upwards. Actually, if you contract, you don't feel it go down, right? Why not? Also don't work out. But if you contract here, do you feel after a while your stomach starts to feel a bit uncomfortable? You're pushing a lot of things upwards. So when you contract, you end up pushing your organs here upwards. The diaphragm, no choice, have to be pushed up a bit also when you contract. Then you reduce the volume over here. Okay, so this is the mechanism of breathing. I find this part of the chapter is still manageable if you can visualize this whole process. Do you need to passively exhale first, then you forcefully exhale? I mean, say, do you need to go through the sequence I just went through? So could you inhale and then immediately forcefully exhale? Can, right? Can. Okay, so what would that look like? So it looks something like that. Huh? I inhale. So I'm going to immediately forcefully exhale. Can I? Okay, so let me immediately forcefully exhale now from the start. Forcefully exhale. Yeah? So we skip the relaxing part. You can forcefully exhale immediately after inhaling. Okay? Yeah? So don't go away with the impression that you have to passively exhale first, then you can forcefully exhale. Okay, so this part of the chapter, what kind of questions could I ask you? Notice there's a sequence to all this. Yeah? Sorry? Okay, good. It could be an essay. Usually essays test your ability to link everything in a sequence. There is a sequence. You cannot say that air comes in first and then you start to contract your muscles. It doesn't make sense that way. So for this part of the chapter, what is key is that you know the sequence well. You notice for this part of the chapter, you cannot just interchange the sequence as and when you please. Even if you have all the keywords, but the sequence is off, actually I cannot award you the marks. Okay? So it's very important you know the sequence correctly. Even if you know the keywords, you actually won't be awarded if the sequence is not correct. Because conceptually it doesn't make sense already.
Then if you like leave out some stuff,
Okay, so leaving out parts of the sequence, but if the sequence is still correct, you can still award. But if you jumble up the sequence, but you write the correct thing, you cannot award you because it shows that you don't understand the process. Okay? So for this chapter, the only advice I can give would be know the sequence. And therefore, there are only two ways I could ask you this. Either in essay, to see if you understand the sequence, or in MCQ, where I jumble up the sequence and you choose the correct one. Okay? Only two ways about it. I feel a bit uncomfortable after contracting my abs so much. My stomach is out of place.
I don't feel anything.
Wait, never?
There's no air.
No, you got no,
Yeah.
you got no hey, you are just Eric. No Erica. What time is it? 3:30. Whoa. 3:30. Okay, so then the next part of the chapter on gaseous exchange, what is key?
It's not your abs. It's the stuff.
No,
Why?
Okay, the next two knowledge cafes, I think will be more useful if you really want to up your level of understanding for photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Okay, in the next two knowledge cafe, we will try to compare and contrast the two. Okay, we will really compare and contrast to help you see how things are similar and how things are different. Okay, so gaseous exchange. I'm going to tell you which part of the textbook now that is very useful. For gaseous exchange, could you refer to page 53 of your textbook? In page 53 of your textbook will be a very important page if you want to understand gaseous exchange. It's important for you to know, when you talk about gaseous exchange, how blood flows. Okay? Where does the oxygenated blood come from? Where does it go? Why does it become deoxygenated? So these are important concepts. If you look at page 53 of the textbook, actually have you labeled the parts before? Oh, it's labeled already. Okay, so pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, label. Could you label where the aorta is? They didn't draw it for you. No, they drew it for you. So can you label the aorta? Okay, so this is the, is it labeled for you? I don't think so. So vena cava. Okay, for gaseous exchange, please have a big picture of where the oxygenated blood goes, where it comes from. You need a big picture to appreciate this. Okay, vena cava. You learned this before in circulatory system. Vena cava, do you find blood that is oxygenated or deoxygenated? Deoxygenated. But can you tell me why? So why it comes from the rest of the body? Okay, so but you notice therefore, can I mix this topic, this part of the chapter with cellular respiration? I can. Yeah? Sorry? this part. Can you tell me now, very quickly, at all of these parts of the body, what's the proportion of oxygen and CO2 you will find? Will you find a lot of oxygen and CO2 or very little of it? Okay, so over here. Okay, so let's begin here. Do we have a lot of CO2 or very little CO2? But can you link why? Okay, so why, the why of it now, you have a deeper appreciation. This is a result of cellular respiration. Is there a lot of O2?
No.
No. Okay. Where does cellular respiration take place? Oh, okay. Sorry. Now you all have so much understanding that you will tell me there's at the mitochondria and then at the matrix there. Okay. So it takes place at the cell level or the rest of the body. So this is where cellular respiration will take place. Yeah. Okay. Then for this part over here, will you have a lot of O2 or very little O2? CO2? Okay, you must explain why. So how do you explain this? Where did O2 come from? Oh yeah, it goes this way, it comes here. So how will you explain why the blood over here has a lot of oxygen now? Okay, it came from the lungs. So it came from the lungs. That's where you get all the oxygen from. Okay, what about here? The blood over here. What would you expect to find being pumped to the rest of the body? High O2? Little O2?
Higher than CO2, but not as high as O2.
Okay, still like high O2, low CO2, right? As it's going to the rest of the body. Now, if you look at your notes, right? Actually, did they already show you all this information? Okay, so actually, can you appreciate this information a bit more? They actually already tried to show you the proportion of O2 and CO2 at each part. But what I hope you can take away from this is that you appreciate why there's more and why there's less. Can you appreciate that? Right? Why is there a lot of O2? Why is there very little CO2? Yeah.
Then why is it that the blood media and tissue capillaries, the O2 and CO2 is like almost the same?
At the bottom part, is it?
Yeah, in the blood entering the alveolar capillaries. Like, shouldn't the CO2 be a lot higher?
Oh, okay. Shouldn't CO2 be a lot higher compared to O2? Okay, actually, in reality, it's not the case. We don't produce exceeding amounts of CO2 as a result. There will be more, but it's actually not what we think it is. Its reality is not that much more. Okay, so this part of the chapter is important for you to have appreciation of the entire system and know which parts have high O2, which parts low CO2, and understand why. Because there's cellular respiration taking place, and then you also can get oxygen from the lungs. Finally, it's important for you to know, therefore, how is O2 transported? How is CO2 transported? So that we can bring it to the places for gaseous exchange. Actually, O2 is the easiest. How is O2 transported? Okay, so for O2, you need to know that there's oxyhemoglobin. Where else can you transport oxygen in? A bit in the plasma. Anywhere else you can transport it in? Okay, what about CO2? Where do you transport CO2? Okay, actually, you can actually transport carbon dioxide in hemoglobin also, a very little of it. Okay, so hemoglobin is possible. You can also transport, but you transport most of it in plasma.
Wait,
Yeah.
hemoglobin, is it the carboamino or carboxy hemoglobin?
Or the carboamino hemoglobin.
Then the carboxy is for carbon monoxide, right?
There's a carboxy.
No, because like it was one of the
we are looking at carbamino hemoglobin here. Okay, so from what I recall, the part of the chapter where you have trouble is understanding how carbon dioxide is transported. Okay, remember there's all this carbonic anhydrase stuff. When I look through your quiz and your RE, I think that's the portion that we have a little bit of trouble in. Okay, so let's talk about CO2. How is CO2 largely transported? It's largely transported in the form of plasma. But how? Okay, so I'm going to draw a red blood cell right now. Inside red blood cells, you find a special enzyme called
Carbonic anhydrase.
Thank you. Carbonic anhydrase. What is carbonic anhydrase role? Okay, so when there is CO2 present, CO2, a lot of it will first go inside the red blood cell. It will then convert the CO2 into with water. Okay, that's not the, you don't need to know that. That was not so key. So this particular reaction over here, okay, when we convert CO2 into H2CO3, that's the role of carbonic anhydrase. Okay, and then there's the second part. This will then dissociate. You all learn in chemistry dissociation. So you have H plus ions, and then you will have HCO3 minus. This step over here does not involve the enzyme at all. Instead, this HCO3 will then go into the plasma, where it's transported in the form of an ion. So where is the challenge in understanding this? I think perhaps as students, maybe the challenge is in understanding what's the role of carbonic anhydrase. Is its role in this part, converting it from this into its ions, or is it converting this to this? Okay, so actually its role is just to convert CO2 into a form of acid. From the acid, it dissociates naturally, like how acids would dissociate. Okay? Yes?
We have to talk about how it's added to the hemoglobin.
Not so necessary. Yeah, it's okay, right? Yeah, okay, then how do we convert this back into CO2? Yeah, let's just go the other way. So if I want to convert this back into CO2, it just needs to go the other way around. And then go the other way back to form CO2. Yeah, now I'm going to number all this up. I'm going to number it 1, 2, and 3. Does that make sense? Let me number it with colors. 1, 4. Okay, you tell me which steps are required. Do we require carbonic anhydrase?
1 and 2.
Yeah. So there's 1, 2, 3. 3 is the blue one, and 4. Which steps require carbonic anhydrase?
1 and 2.
Okay. So actually, I think this is the part that we just need to clear. Carbonic anhydrase is only required to convert the CO2 into the acid. Nothing more than that. Yeah. And I think this question may have came up before. Okay. So for gaseous exchange, there is the bulk of it. This particular chapter is not the toughest chapter in biology. I think the next 2 chapters, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, we spend more time trying to link everything together in one big nice picture. Then we'll appreciate it better also. Okay? Okay. So today is a mental break a little bit. Right? Have a good 3-day break. Yeah. There's no school tomorrow. So next week we'll start off immediately with some basic questions to test your recall for respiratory system. And then we will really start to link photosynthesis and cellular respiration so that we appreciate it as a one full topic. Yeah? And then, once in a while, we'll pull up old Kahoots, renal system, so that we retain as much information as possible. We only have one more chapter for the mid-years. Yeah? And we are already, for some classes, 1 quarter way through. Sorry, 4.3. 4.3, we are 1 quarter into the chapter already. Yeah. You did it? Did you look through the answers? Oh, yeah, look at the answers. Yeah. So the point of it is that you look through and then you have questions, you text me or you ask me right now. Yeah. I mean, I cannot do anything. Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry? No, I didn't. Yeah, you haven't even started, right? Oh, that's nice. I'll give you one next week. Yeah, this chapter is easier. Okay, everyone, I totally forgot about this, but you could grab a snack on the way out. This week I have a lot of wang wangs. No, it's wang wang, not wang wang. Okay, now I have some prawn snacks. If you are allergic, please don't take it.